you are the CEO of your own career. You must own your development. Not the company. The company doesn't own it. You must own it. In my 23 years, early years in Shell, Leon, I have observed this. The best people that succeed in Shell are those that
Welcome to the Game of Impossible podcast. My name is Leon and this is my dad, Idris Jala. We are a father and son podcast where we discuss all things transformation through the lens of business, leadership, sport, and faith. We've been talking a lot about leadership from an organizational standpoint. Over the last few episodes, they have been, decisions at the sort of organizational level. But I thought today would be good to kind of bring it back down to the level of the individual. If we talk about the game of impossible, big, fast results, what does that look like on an individual level? And I think more pertinently, let's talk about it through the lens of career progression today. I think that's on a lot of people's minds. If you are a fresh graduate, you're thinking about how will you chart your career. But even if you're at the top of your game, then you would also be asking, how can I continue to be the best version of myself? How can I continue to be effective in raising and releasing other leaders as well? So let's talk about career progression. I think the first thing to probably note and to caveat is the fact that career progression, I think for most people, certainly for you and for me, was very much non-linear. Non-linear in a sense that for both of us, I think we have ended up doing things that we never really imagined we'd be doing.
Correct.
We've responded to certain curveballs in our career as well that have sent us on a slightly different trajectory, but trajectories that have worked out nonetheless. Now, if you are a religious person, then you might link that to some form of divine intervention. And for us as Christians, we take peace or find peace and solace in knowing that even if plans are derailed, that what was meant for evil can be turned for good. And so because we believe that, that allows us to then be able to be more willing to pivot in these different seasons. But I think it's also worth discussing today on a secular level as well, the value in being light around some of our plans and the willingness to pivot. I think the first rule, and we'll discuss this through two lenses. First, at the level of the individual as an employee or as someone within the firm, as a leader within a firm, but then also from an organizational level, two perspectives and 5 rules for each one. Now, for the first one today, I think at the level of the individual, I think the first thing to note is, at least this is what we believe. We believe that your development is your own responsibility. Yes, companies can put in place trainings and, to some degree, we should hold our organizations that we work for accountable for providing that. But I think in many ways, those can be things that are also self-initiated too.
Yeah, in other words, you are the CEO of your own career.
Yeah.
And so the role of the organization in this case would be to provide the ecosystem to help you develop and grow based on your own aspiration. So that's why, because you pointed, Leon, you mentioned that both you and I have careers that are not linear. You might call them even checkered and they are zigzagging. But that's why we don't actually chart out precisely what are the rules for a very linear way to do it. So we provide rules. These are the rules that will help you. Whatever roles you take in your career, you become successful. So the first rule must always be that you must own your development. Not the company. The company doesn't own it. You must own it. In my 23 years, early years in Shell, Leon, Shell operates as a multinational in more than 100 countries. I have observed this. The best people that succeed in Shell are those that always sought very tough roles. They deliberately the ones that look for the tough roles, that challenge them to the hilt. They're the same guys that pursued growth aggressively. And they didn't sit there and wait for the organization to develop them, to provide them the training. They're not passive. They're actively looking for it. All those people that climb the corporate ladder and succeed in delivering results are those that took the aspect of their career as their own, rather than blaming the organization for lack of development, rather than if there's lack of development, they blame themselves.
Yeah.
So the only way to go and progress is to step forward and take on tough roles, challenging themselves for growth. And that's the people that succeed.
Yeah. And I always liked, we've returned to this a few times now, but when we interviewed Tan Sri Asman Mokhtar, the former MD of Khazanah, he talked about this thing called the 5-minute rule.
Yeah.
And I wondered, how does one get to a point where they can be bold enough to live by that 5-minute rule? For those who have not seen that episode, the basic premise of the 5-minute rule is that you, in any transformative pursuit that you really care about, you have to be willing as the leader to be 5 minutes away from either being sacked or from resigning.
Yeah.
For the greater good, in the interest of pursuing or achieving that true north.
Yeah.
And so I've asked myself, well, how do you then arrive at having a very clear sense of purpose, very clear true north at an individual level? Because like you said, I think if you have a clear sense of what you want to achieve, then it doesn't really matter in what capacity that happens. It doesn't matter what kind of industry, what kind of job. You will find ways to be able to do that, to fulfill that purpose in any space. And so then the question is, how do we engineer this? How do we arrive at that? If some of us, like myself, spent many years not having a clear sense of purpose, if you like, how do you arrive at that? Our lead pastor at the church that I work for, he has a very simple statement.
Which is?
The statement says, my purpose in life is to blank. So that blank. So the first blank, let's call it A, is essentially how will you use, and now this is in a Christian context, but how will you use your God-given talents and skills to help others? So if you want to think of it also through that Ikigai diagram, this can be, where are your natural skills? Where are you proficient in? And here is the other caveat. It says to help others, because it shouldn't be self-serving. I think if a vision is merely self-serving, it's simply an indulgence. Where you start to veer into the area of purpose is where it starts to serve others. So that's the first thing. But then B is the impact that, in this case, the impact that God makes in your life. So there has to be some sort of experiential truth that is also driving the thing that you want to achieve. And so if we simply do this exercise at the individual level, I think it sets us up better to be able to own our growth, no matter where we are. Even if we feel like our company is not providing us enough learning opportunities, I think if you are so anchored on wanting to achieve these things for yourself, you will naturally be able to find pockets of opportunities, whether it's in your firm or whether it's through other areas that you might be volunteering in as well, to be able to do this. And so I definitely agree with you on rule number 1 about finding ways to own your own development. And it could be following something like this. It could also work out in other ways as well.
Let me build on the very point that you started initiating the how. How do you do that? That comes directly into rule number 2. The rule number 2 is the how. Because for career development, the rule number 2 is you must be the best version of yourself in whatever you do. In the current job, you present the best version of yourself to do so that you achieve big, fast results. Frankly speaking, organization want results. Organization don't pay you a salary to sit there and do processes and activities that they don't get to results. They want results. So the second thing you need to do is the organization doesn't just want result in a long time, they want it now. So the speed within which you do is key. Another thing that organization always want from you in your current job to be a best version of yourself, make the results big, not incremental, not small results. So that's why in Pemandu, we talk about BFR, big, fast results. And our view is that for career development, the how-to is that if you want to align the things that you do for your career development, for you to grow, and if you keep chasing big, fast results, you will find that the organization will say, wow, we like this guy because he gets results for us, he do it fast, and he makes it big. And that's in the process of doing that, you grow. So that's rule number 2. Rule number 2 is that be the best version of yourself to achieve big, fast results. And if you do that, I can almost guarantee you the organization will love you and you will be rewarded for it. You will grow more than the trajectory that you ever imagined.
Yeah. And I think this is important because it takes the pressure off. It takes the pressure off you to think that you need to have mapped out a destination for your career.
You don't worry
or
about
to
mapping
engineer
that
the
out.
next move,
Yeah.
either to your next promotion or even if it's to a switch to another company. And I think for you especially, that has been how you have how your career has played out. Certainly for me as well. I don't think at any point in our career have we identified either a particular position that we want to move into or identified a company that we want to move into and began to engineer a way to get there. I think the focus has always been how can I just be the best at what I'm doing in whatever is in front of me. Even if you feel like that job, maybe, to be real, maybe you feel like the current job that you're in is a boring one. It's not necessarily feeling the most fulfilling thing.
Yeah.
But there's a real value in just saying, you know what, I'm committed to this job for now. My role is just to do the best that I can do in this place. And I think Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, said the same thing. He said, for a long time, I was cleaning toilets. But when I was cleaning toilets, I also told myself that I want to just be the best damn toilet cleaner that there was. And that was the attitude, the discipline of action, if you like, another principle that we talk about.
Yeah, absolutely.
That ultimately, if you do that and you do that well, people will notice.
Yeah.
And you either rise up the ranks within the organization just by sheer virtue of your ability to deliver. But if not, then other people will also hear. And then opportunities elsewhere will also come your way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's rule number two. The rule number three is quite aligned to rule number two. That means in searching for career development, let's say you are finishing your 3 years in that role. You have a staff appraisal with your boss. Then the question arises, the boss will ask you, Leon, what do you want to do next? That conversation is a very important conversation. You can either say, I want to do this, and the organization said, actually, you're very good at doing this. We want you to do that. And they may not be completely aligned. So that rule number two is about find win-win opportunities for the organization and yourself in career development. But it's always the organization want to get the best result out from you. But you yourself want to grow. It may be that sometimes you want to take on a role that you have never had any experience. And perhaps in the first year in that new role, you will not achieve results because you're still learning the ropes. You probably make some mistakes along the way. But if you stayed on in doing the same job that you've been having for the last 4 years, you would not be growing. You just become slightly better at doing what you're doing. You get into the marginal curve, utility curve. So the learning wouldn't be exponential. So the key here is to find a job that's win-win. The organization say, I can see that. But there will be jobs somewhere in between. They will get the best out from you and the best out from the organization as well. So that's the third rule. In my view. And can you relate your own experience? You've done many different things that somehow it clicked between what you want to do and what the organization actually want out from you.
Yeah, I think the most probably obvious example that comes to mind was when I was a fresh graduate. I just come out of uni and I was looking for a job.
Right.
And I was looking for a job in advertising. I had applied to all sorts. Naturally, most of my applications initially went to the smaller local agencies, thinking that I'd probably have a better shot at landing something there. I didn't. So these local fellas weren't even responding to my emails. I didn't even get an interview. And so at one point I got very frustrated and I figured, well, maybe you know what? I want to show these guys that these local agencies won't take me. Instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the big agency. So I decided to go to Leo Burnett. And what I told them is, look, I don't have the experience, but I'm willing to come on as an intern with a very nominal intern salary.
Yeah.
But what I did was I said, well, obviously that this has to be of value to you as well.
Yeah.
So what I asked the creative director at the time, who is now the executive creative director, Iska Hashim. I told him, I know I can't get, probably don't have the qualifications to get a full-time job, but would you take me on as an intern? And
It's a win-win for them.
Pay me the minimum salary for an intern, but let's agree on a 3-month time frame.
Yeah.
So in that 3 months, let me prove that I can do the job. And if I don't do it, then you can either keep me on as an intern, or you can just release me.
Yeah.
But if I do it, and if I do prove myself valuable to the agency, can we agree that we could discuss the potential of me having a full-time position after that? And so that was the first example of where I realized
that's a good
you
example.
need to be able to also be clear that everything has to be win-win.
Yeah.
So you also have to make sure that your value that you are providing is made clear.
Yeah.
And sometimes that will mean having to take risks like this as well, to ensure that there is also value for them. And it also ensures that you're helping them to mitigate their own risk in bringing you on as someone who's not tried, not tested as well. And I think this also applies in conversations about asking for a raise, asking for a promotion. I think sometimes, and I've been guilty of this as well, sometimes I have carried unnecessary frustration because I have felt that, it is the company's responsibility to look out for my progression, to be the ones to initiate conversations about either a raise, a promotion, etc. But actually, if you change the script a little bit and go back to rule number 1 about owning your own development, that puts you in a better place to, again, add value, because that allows you to change the conversation to, this is how much I've been putting in, therefore I should be remunerated, to putting out a challenge to say, I've achieved this much. What I've already achieved now is a reason to believe for something else that I would like to lead moving forward. Something else I would like to spearhead, whether it's about increasing revenue, whether it's about, doubling the take up for a particular service or program that you're running. Set a new true north that will get your leadership excited about what you're going to do, and then give examples of how you think you're going to chart that, and then use that as your basis for asking for that promotion, as opposed to saying, I deserve X amount. Usually, I think the problem with a lot of organizations is we find ourselves remunerating, promoting by virtue of time spent in an organization. So one of the ways that we try to change this thinking is by introducing what we call a multiplier mindset, where we don't just remunerate based on contribution, but we also remunerate on the ability of a person to be able to multiply. So to multiply also means for to deliver results, but also to think of ways to scale those results. For us in the church setting, that it usually looks like intentional leadership development.
Sure.
So you are only as good as a leader as you are a teacher as well. So we look at people who are intentionally raising and releasing others as a marker for effective leadership. So if you're able to do that, then that's when we say that you've reached a level of maturity to perhaps deserve to move up to the next level, versus people who only see their value in the amount of volume of work that they can produce. Because I would argue that is a game of addition and not necessarily a game of multiplication.
Yeah, I'll tell you a little story of how I demonstrated that I took charge of my own career development from rule number 1. I worked for Shell for my early part of my career. Then after that was in human resource. And then I was posted to do business re-engineering here in Kuala Lumpur. At that time, I wanted to do a line job. I didn't want to return to HR. And then suddenly Shell actually wanted to put me back into an HR job, actually based in London. It was a promotion. They put me based in London because they said, you're very good human resource. We want to promote you, go to London. I took charge of my own career. I said, this is enough. I really want to go and learn something completely new. I applied for a job in Coopers and Lybrand. I went for an interview in Jakarta in Indonesia. I got the job. They gave me the job as vice president for oil and gas within the region for Coopers and Lybrand. Coopers and Lybrand doesn't exist today. They were acquired by PwC.
Yeah.
So at that point, I had the job. So I would have been the vice president and for oil and gas within the region. It was.
I never knew that. This is my first time hearing this story.
So then I tendered my resignation. When I tendered my resignation, I took charge because I said, look, I already did that job before. I already spent a large chunk of my life doing that. And I do want to go into a line. So that was on a Friday afternoon. I had a conversation with the chairman of Shell. On Monday, I started work in retail. That was the speed within which the decision was made, because I am not going to retract this resignation letter unless I get what I want. It was at that point I really put down on the line, because I wanted career development outside what I've already done. I wanted to chart out an entirely different career. And if I didn't get it from Shell, I walk out. It's as simple as that. That was a conversation that I had as far as the chairman of Shell. And we were sitting in this room, and that was on a Friday. On Monday morning, I turned up into a line job in retail. And that's what I mean by taking charge of your career. Like at some point, you have to really, really now own it. For me, there's no sweat. You have to just take charge and do what you believe is right for you.
Let's talk about the fourth rule now. So if we've established the kind of mindset to have, now I think the fourth rule is around how do we now institutionalize this learning process along the way. And, the two of us were big subscribers of the 70-20-10 rule, which says that 70% of your learning should be from doing.
Yeah.
Learning by doing is what we call it in Pemandu Associates, but basically on the job experiential learning. 20% then comes from input from a mentor, coach, or even your peers. And then actually only 10% from formal training. So while it's important to have that kind of formal training, whether it's going for a training or whether it's doing some sort of sit-down classroom style training in-house, that's important. But actually, if we look at it through this kind of 70-20-10 rule, that only serves as 10% of your learning and development. I think sometimes, and I was guilty of this, I used to think that it should have been the other way around. And I found myself in positions early on in my career being very frustrated with my previous employers at the time, because I believed that they were not providing me with what I thought should have been 70% classroom training or 70% even mentor or coach training, which I didn't get. But now when I look back in hindsight, I'm glad that I didn't get that. And because so much of the learning had come from learning on the job. And I think the beauty is when you accept that most of your learning will come from learning on the job, you will also end up learning things that you didn't necessarily expect to learn, whether it's skills on how to manage people. I think sometimes those are things that we don't talk enough about. A lot of the work that we do, besides the templates, besides the methodologies, it all boils down to human interaction. We were having a chat with one of our joint MDs in Pemandu recently about the consulting in the age of AI, when so much of what we do is able to be churned out by a learning model like ChatGPT in a matter of seconds. Will we get to a place eventually where the role of a consultant is simply diminished or made redundant? And I think we concluded that ultimately, no, it won't be. Certainly not in the way that we run our organization, at least, because for us, the focus has always been on implementation and delivery. The way that we do our strategy is all facilitative, and it's based on other people's inputs, clients' inputs, other partners' inputs. But it all boils down to how well we deliver, how well we implement. And at the level of delivery and implementation, that comes down to your ability to influence behaviors. Behaviors not just within your team, but because you're also now working with clients who maybe have different cultures, different ways of doing things. So the ability to influence behavior is important. A lot of these things that have to do with human interactions, you will cover some of it in formal training, but a lot of it you can only fully learn by experiencing it yourself, by experiencing a difficult conversation.
Right.
Also learning how to fail, knowing what it's like to handle a difficult conversation badly. Those are also things that will then inform you how to do it correctly the next time. So sometimes you need to experience, and sometimes you also need to fail in order to develop and to get better.
Let me build on that. So when you have failed, you have a tough conversation, you fail. The learning is from reflection. So you have failed, but if you do not reflect on it, you will never learn. The converse can happen too. If you succeed, you don't reflect on it by asking the question, why did I succeed? And if you know the reason why you succeed, then you know how to repeat it the next time around. Because if you don't spend time reflecting, that's where you just go through an experience on the job that does not get you the optimum learning. The optimum learning comes through the experience on the job and reflecting on the experience of why this has succeeded and why this has failed. What are the learning lessons? That's when you get the 70%. Otherwise, if you just simply passively go through the routine of doing your job, but you never reflect, that you never have the 70%. Probably at best, you get 10% out from the real learning. So the reflection is absolutely key.
One thing I would also add to this is actually reflection is one, but also ensuring that you find ways to teach it to others.
Correct.
Because where the learning is really, where it really materializes is when you have to begin to synthesize it in order to be teachable and made foolproof enough for another person. That does favors for you in terms of internalizing that learning better, but it's also going to position you as a more effective leader as well. I think the reality is that when it comes to career progression, besides your ability to be the best at what you're doing, the reality is that there is always going to be a degree of workplace politics at play.
Yeah.
You can either play the victim to that and just say, well, I can't do that. I can't position myself as an effective leader, and therefore I'm just going to continue performing, but being bitter about the fact that my performance isn't recognized. Or you can lean into that and say, what are the things that are going to help me to be able to demonstrate greater leadership? And so this will also do you favors in doing that, because that shows that you're playing an active role in coaching others as well.
Yeah.
Goes back to that sense of purpose as well, because whatever you do shouldn't just be self-serving, shouldn't just be about, I want to be the best at this, but I want to be the best at what I'm doing in order that I could then synthesize that to be able to coach someone else to do it as well, if not better than me. And that is ultimately how you become a multiplier kind of leader. So 70-20-10 rule plus a reflection and teaching component to it.
Can I build on your teaching component? When you say the teachable point of view, some of you have listened to some of our earlier episodes. I can't remember precisely which one, but I talked about this need for reflection. And I'm just going to say there are very simple template that you should use. And I would suggest that we take time out once in 2 weeks to reflect on your experience. And the template is get a sheet of paper with 3 columns in it. Column number 1 is my teachable point of view, based on the experience that you've had. And column number 2 is that evidence to support my teachable point of views. So there's, you put evidence, number 1, number 2, this is the evidence. This is the things that we did, and that's the reason why it's successful. Even when you fail, these are the evidence to show why the conversation, there was destructive and a terrible conversation. This is the evidence to show that it failed. And the last column is my word of wisdom. Having reflected on this, what are the key words of wisdom that you then can grasp out from the learning that you've had in this? And I think that if you do this dutifully, once in 2 weeks in reflection, you will find that you grow so rapidly, almost quantum leap in a very short period of time. But this practice of going through a routine for reflection based on that teachable point of view, evidence support my teachable point of view, and then my words of wisdom. And if you do that, you get the maximum after the 70%.
And then I think the final rule for the first part, as we're looking at things through the lens of development at the level of the individual is to check your market value every 3 years. And this is, I think, it's a good exercise to do, because it can also be a humbling exercise.
Yeah.
Sometimes you, without realizing, can get to a place where you think you are better than you actually are. So it's good to, number one, get feedback internally, and that's why we have things like evaluation systems, 360 feedback systems in place to do that. But sometimes it's also worth seeking some external feedback from outside. Something that you often recommend for people to do is then to say, well, every 3 years, why don't you go and test your market value? You're not necessarily doing it because you think you want to leave your current place, but sometimes it's just a good test of value. How has this looked like for you?
It's been very good. When I was 30 years old, Leon, I attended a course by Shell in Lansbury in London. I was sent there, and we sat down there. There was a Filipino trainer that stood there, and he started by saying this: the best people in Shell are people that have something in their pocket. Then he paused for a long time. It's almost dramatic. And then everybody wondering, why is this guy posing for a long time? And he said, something in the pocket. Then we all looked at him and stared at him. He said, let me tell you what I mean by something in your pocket. That means I encourage every one of you, all people in Shell, once in 3 years to go and apply for a job outside Shell. After you apply for the job outside Shell, three things can happen to you. One, the best part is that you have a job offer. And you know the salary and etc. You know the conditions. That's the first thing. And if you like it, you probably leave. But if you don't think it's good enough, but you prefer to stay in Shell, that means you have something in your pocket. That means you're not trapped in the job in Shell because you have no choice. You know you always something in the pocket. You know there's market value for you outside. If you don't like what you do, you can step out. That means you have an alternative. So the best people in Shell is never the guys who are doing the job because they feel trapped, but the folks that feel liberated and they choose to stay because they love their job. They are the best at what they want to do. But when the beer, he says, doesn't taste nice, that's the time to go and search out for the thing in your pocket and leave. And the converse thing can happen. The third thing is that you don't get an offer. And if you don't get an offer, then you are put down to real world. You're brought down where you are, then you don't have a big ego about your own self. Then you become much more humble about yourself. You adjust your self-expectation based on the basis of you know your market value. Then you become a lot more greater gratitude for what you have. You don't become a complainant.
Exactly. There's a quote by this guy, Ryan Holiday, who wrote the book, Ego is the Enemy.
Yeah.
And he said that as the island of our knowledge increases, so does the shore of our ignorance.
Yeah.
And that is what a great reminder for all of us in any stage of our career or just self-development to remember that the more we think we know, actually, the more we have to be intentional about ensuring that our ignorance doesn't grow with it. Or rather, to accept that our ignorance will grow with it, but then to be able to provide ways or find ways to get that feedback loop in to shore up that ignorance.
So if you follow the earlier rule number 2 before that we talked about before, that means the best version of yourself to deliver big, fast result. And if you're constantly doing that, you know what happened, Leon? You don't even need to apply for the job every 2 to 3 years. The jobs come and find you. They will come to you and people will offer you jobs and they tell you, this is the job we want to give to you. You don't even need to check it. So the best example would be after some time when you really push rule number 2 to the hilt, you deliver big, fast results and people love and the best version of yourself, word get out. You never need to apply. Frankly speaking, I have reached a point in my earlier part of my career, I didn't actually need to apply for it. The jobs came to me. And they come to me, they put it on the table. I mean, I never applied. There was a job offer. They asked me to become the CEO of Proton.
Yeah.
And I turned it down. So there are many such offers, and I had many other offers that were put on the table. You turned it down. You didn't apply for them. But the point is that you know your market value.
Yeah.
You understand your market value. And if the jobs don't find you, then my take is that check out your market value by applying. But you decide to stay, and when you decide to stay, it is people like this that can become Tan Sri Azman Mokhtar. The 5-minute rule can apply because you know your market value outside. You're 5 minutes from resigning. If you do not think that the things that you're doing fulfill what you really want to do, and the organization is asking you to do something that compromises your own integrity, you're 5 minutes from resigning. You can put it on the table.
I think these are very practical
Yeah.
handles for how we can take ownership of our own career development. And I would say, maybe to close, as a final bit of encouragement, having done all of this, or if you feel like, I wish I had heard this episode a bit earlier, because I haven't been doing any of this, I think my encouragement is really, at the end of the day, as we said earlier, career development is often non-linear. In fact, I would argue that it is never linear.
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
always non-linear. And if we accept it as such, then I think the encouragement is that at the end of the day, nothing goes to waste.
Yeah.
I don't think this just applies for Christians, although we might have a greater awareness of this. But even if you're not a spiritual or religious person, it's whatever you have put time into, even if you feel like at that point in time it didn't make sense, if you apply some of these things, and if you apply a very intentional reflection of what it is you are learning currently in your current workplace, even if you feel like it's not the place for you, I think if you do that intentionally over time, you will naturally find yourself moving into a place of convergence.
Yeah.
That's been the case for you. It's definitely the case for me as well, where certain experiences which at the time didn't really make sense, at some point finally starts to come together, and you begin to see how all of these disciplines, even if I didn't enjoy that particular job, even if I didn't enjoy, in your case, doing development studies,
Yeah.
all of these things eventually find a point of convergence. And so nothing is ever wasted. So even if you're listening to this and you feel like you have already, you feel like maybe you have stagnated in your job, nothing is ever wasted.
Yeah.
And I think provided we now have the awareness of what to do with different experiences, we will find that all things will eventually work out for good. And so I think that wraps up part 1 of our
Part
discussion. Next week, we will go into part 2 of this. Today, we looked at it from the level of the individual, but next week's episode, we will explore part 2, which is exploring how do we as an organization put in place certain systems and guardrails to ensure not just development for our company, but ensure development for its people as well. So thank you all for listening to yet another episode of The Game of Impossible. If this is your first time watching or listening, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube and Spotify. We upload episodes every Friday at 6 a.m. And we also have short form content on both our IG and TikTok at The Game of Impossible. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all next week for part 2. Take care.